to our Sustainable Tairawhiti meeting. Councillor Akuata Brown, would you open with a karakia for us? Oh, we might just stand with you.
We ask this in your mighty name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, councillors, welcome. We've got quite a bit on today. We will go through our Sustainable Tairawhiti agenda, and then after morning tea, we will start on our workshop agenda, which is quite chunky and lots of information in there. So I'm going to start with apologies. Apology for Councillor Seymour for lateness. Moved by Councillor Akuata Brown, seconded by Councillor Dowsing. All in favour? Contrary carried. Declarations of interest. Any declarations today with what's in our agenda? Just use your microphone if you're speaking.
I'm not sure if it's a conflict of interest, but we're discussing the Motu Catchment project, the Motu Catchment, and I was the project manager for the existing catchment project.
Yes, thank you, noted. Okay, let's move on to page 5. We're looking at our minutes. At this stage, it's unconfirmed. Take a good look. If you have any questions or comments around the minutes, now's your time. Moved by Councillor Dowsing, seconded by Councillor Wharehenga. No more discussion? All in favour? Contrary carried. We move on to our action sheet, which is page 12. 15, 16, 16. Take a good look at the actions there. Anyone have questions around what is happening on our action sheet? Use your microphone.
Just around the science program being available in a different format, are we able to get that yet?
I understand that has been developed. I'll for you.
Thank you. Okay, councillors. Let's move on to the paper around our governance work plan. That is on page 19, the first report in our paper today. It is quite straightforward. It gives us 4 different meetings with what will be done during that meeting. That is how staff know, and you can see these chunky bits, especially our end of year meeting, where we will make lots of decisions around the work that we are doing now. Any questions around our graph? Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Yes, it was around that December meeting and whether there's any ability to spread that load so it's not such a significant final meeting, the final meeting of the year.
Yeah, through your worship, I'll have another look at what's in that December meeting. So what we would be doing is there's also the final council meeting of the year as well, whether we can, so what the balance is in between those 2 meetings around how we'll shape that up. But yeah, take that on board.
Thank you. Yeah, a lot of those will have significant appendices, so it'll be a mighty agenda.
Any more questions? Councillor Akuata Brown and then Councillor Worsnell.
Morena koutou. Listen, I just had one question, and it's just in respect to the wholeness of this particular Sustainable Tairawhiti. Are we comfortable with covering off everything as much as we don't want to all be at the end of a year, but everything that could be talked around sustainability? I just was looking through, and with the current climate change action askings, like, mitigation of, are we comfortable that we are doing all things sustainably in Te Tairawhiti currently?
Quite a wide question, but I will leave it open to the CEO to answer.
So with regard to this governance work program, you've got a number of strategies in there, and we'll have a discussion on the infrastructure and financial strategy as we work through to the December meeting to shape that up aligned with your mission and your strategic priorities. And embedded in that is the lens around sustainability and climate change. So you will recall when you may recall when the auditors were here, that's part of the key considerations is how we're addressing strategically climate change lens across our long-term plan. So that's embedded in a number of these plans here. Further to that, as we progress the Tairawhiti Resource Management Plan, we will be looking at a subcommittee of some form to start shaping up the environmental planning rules. So that will be in the new year, not in the new calendar year.
I guess supplementary then to micro it in a bit, is there anything we are doing that we could say as a real intensified, push for sustainable, that we tick it off bits in our work program? So is there something that we're saying, actually, we have moved this to this, and if we keep doing this, kind of thing. I just want to send our region a good message that we understand sustainability.
Well, I think, Councillor Brown, your community outcomes, where you've said we take sustainability seriously and where you will protect and enhance our environment and biodiversity, sends a really clear signal as to what the council's intentions are there. It's now around how you ground that into through your plans and the long-term plan.
That was sort of a little bit of what I wanted to touch on as well. Well, you've sort of answered it a little bit with talking about the potential for the subcommittee. I guess you'll have a good understanding of just how big the environmental space has become. And I guess my concern is the ability for meetings to capture a lot of that. You'll be probably struggling with that yourself, I imagine. What I probably would really like to understand a little bit better is how are we able to, in this meeting format, to fully utilise what's available, I suppose, in the current environment, and possibly not for a huge length of time in terms of the government stimulus being put into the environmental space. I know that we've got some huge demands locally in different areas. Are these meetings, I suppose, in what we've got in them in terms of the scope of our agendas, does that enable us to add in things like that, or are we too constrained? We're going to miss out on opportunities.
And that's a good question. I think this is the governance work program as according to what staff have on our priority list as outlined in our previous annual plans and what we've committed to. If there's any other things that's on top of this, then that's at the discretion of the committee to therefore decide and agree and resolve to include something into the work plan. But with regard to that, we've still, there's the operations committee next week, and that agenda is quite heavily updating on all the number of initiatives that we've been engaged with MPI and the like. In here, what we would be doing, what's not here is where we would propose that subcommittee dropout. And similarly with our freshwater plans, if you're seeing by 2024 that we need to have them, we would be looking at a similar approach. The committee won't be able to do all of that.
Councillor Seymour. Morning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and apologies for lateness.
We did put it in.
An issue and I was outside in the car. With respect to the freedom camping bylaw, I was wanting to know, because it's been a matter that's been raised in several quarters and was raised again at Makarori, are we able to consider the issues around driving vehicles on beaches in the context of all of that discussion?
Let's go here.
Through the chair, I understand our staff are having those discussions, and it's been identified where it's been going through a process of particular landowners of particular parts where that is happening. So it definitely is being investigated by staff at the moment. Whether we can include it, it's around title, as I understand, may be a constraint.
I don't think that's entirely the point. There's real concern about the driving of vehicles on the public part of the beach at speed, and it's not just about private titles. And I think this council, if we have a will, should raise that issue and ask staff to include it, because it is really important. It's been raised at this table previously. The issue was raised around driving on Nara last summer, and I've raised that once here just to flag. where the dotterels nest, and that was the case of just two-wheeled motorbikes for the hell of it. The issue of driving on the beach to Puawa, and there's some goodwill around having some control so that people can drive on the beach to launch their vehicle by boat or by vehicle or quad, but simply to do that and not drive the length of the beach because that's comfortable. And Makarori have raised it many times. The Mayor herself saw the sign about not driving on the reef at Makarori, but the issue of safety has been brought up around Makarori because it's such a lovely flat beach, but many members of our own community take their children there to swim and sit on the beach because there's often a big wide bank of sand, and they would like to see that vehicles cannot drive amongst the families using the beach for what the purpose of the beach. So it's broader than just on private property adjacent to the beach.
Thank you.
I might just get Mr. Wilson to comment and just provide some clarity around the legalities if we can do it or not.
Through you, Your Worship, it depends on which part of the beach. There are some parts of the beach which are privately owned, particularly along Makarori. There's a Māori trust which owns parts of the beachfront along there. However, where it is deemed still a public road, we would be able to look at that through our review of our speed management policy rather than the freedom camping bylaw. So there is a mechanism, but it will depend on the legalities of each of the beaches that we're talking about and whether or not they are still deemed a public road. So we have to do some quite significant underlying work before we'll be able to bring that back.
I just want to affirm that it isn't the private part of the beach. It is the beach that is the public road, and likewise with Inara. So it would be good if we could pursue that.
Thank you. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. On that note, it is only the opinion of one community of our public. We do have a lot of those users, the motorcycle users, have been using that for beach races and other events for many years. There's a lot of beach to sit on.
Clarification in no way impedes the consent and permit that the motorcycle people have to use the beach. They are not the problem. So it's nothing to do with that group of people that do have a consent.
Thanks. I'm sure that is noted. Just bringing us back to this specific paper. That's all good. Okay, if there are no more questions around our work plan, I take you, Councillor
I did have
Upward
three
Brown.
questions and I omitted my last one when Councillor Wilson stepped in. But are we well resourced? I guess I'm wanting to ensure staff and management and all in respect to sustainable, that we have the resource to do all this workplace stuff. I know that's across New Zealand is a big ask of staff and having that resource. So are we confident that we in this region have the staff and resourcing for this work plan?
So as part of the long-term plan workshop that we're going to be undertaking, staff are currently doing their asset management plans. We've got a development workforce plan that sits alongside that will be put forward to council at a later stage to have the discussions around where, if any, gaps we have and how we can fund that.
Thank you for that. We are on page 19. Do I have a mover for this paper? Councillor Foster, do I have a seconder for this paper? Councillor Upward-Brown, all in favour? Contrary, carried. Thank you for that. We move to page 22, development of the Motu catchment plan, and I note that Councillor Worsnop has declared an interest, and I'm happy for her to contribute to the conversation. Everyone else happy with that? Good. Okay, Councillor Dunn, you go first.
Yeah, the two things. I didn't read in here how we are going to connect, because we're talking about the Motu catchment and we only have part of it. There's not enough in here that talks about how we're going to merge it and how it's going to talk to the Bow Plenty end of the catchment, and ensure that we are consistent in our approach and whatever the objectives are, because obviously what happens at the top of the catchment will affect the bottom of the catchment. And secondly was, given the issues that we are currently having north of here in Uawa, on our beaches with slash, how did we manage to make the Motu catchment a priority over the Uawa catchment, given the issues that we're currently facing?
Thank you for that. Yannick, are you going to comment on that? Thank you.
Morena Tata, it's nice to see you. Through you, Your Worship, just in terms of the cross-boundary integration, we're at a reasonably early stage, so we will be working very closely with the Plenty Regional Council and Whanua Apanui as well, who have some interest in multi-catchment. And we will we'll aim to get that integration across the boundaries. With regards to prioritisation of catchments, at the time the Motu was prioritised, it was seen, and it still is seen, as a highly at-risk catchment in terms of water quality. We are aware that there are other catchments that have similar challenges as well. So for the purpose of progressing the freshwater program, was considered that Motu was the first cap off the rank, if you will.
Councillor Robinson.
I read the paper, great paper, thank you. Got some of the questions as well as Ms. Dunn had. But also my question was, why is this so urgent? It said here, paragraph 34, we have a reasonably short time frame for developing the Motu catchment plan. Why is this so urgent suddenly? Is that a mismanagement issue or timing issue or
Legislation.
Through Your Worship, the new government regulations have come out requiring all councils to develop their freshwater plans, the regional plans and the catchment plans by the end of 2024. We have the Motu catchment, we've got Waimata, we've got several catchments to progress by that time frame. So that's actually quite a challenge in itself for all councils, including ours.
question? I do note on your public consultation plan, which is on page 50, you've got 2 hui with iwi planned in August and then the following July, nothing in between. I do know there's a stakeholders iwi consultation group to be formed. I'm assuming that is going to be the information channel for iwi on this, rather than 11-month gap between 2 iwi hui.
That's correct. But what we really want to do is actually give iwi the opportunity to determine how they want to participate.
Thank you. Councillor Dowsing.
Thank you. Because this is legislative, I'm surprised that this needed to be a decision report, to be honest. I thought it's a noting report. But because it has come as a decision report, I would suggest that instead of just endorsing the Motu catchment plan, as we've already identified, it needs to be for all of our catchments. So we should be endorsing the Motu, the Waimata, the Uawa, the Northern Catchment and the Southern Catchment plans simultaneously, so that you don't have to prepare 5 more reports of this like and come back to us and ask us. I would also imagine that there's going to be some achievable reductions in cost if you're running some of these things in parallel and creating a template that works for the multiple plans. We already have 2 plans in existence, so I'm sure you've got a fair handle on how these are going to be delivered. So I'd like to see, and personally the only way I think we'll meet that 2024 deadline is if we progress some of these streams in parallel instead of just doing Motu. So I would like to move the recommendation that we endorse the development of the Motu, the Waimata, the Uawa, the Northern and the Southern catchment plans.
Is management happy with that approach? Does it need individual approaches or individual sign-offs, or is the blanket approach like that okay?
Through your worship, the blanket approach is fine.
Thank you. Coral, do you have that wording? Thank you. I have Councillor Wharehinga and then Councillor Faulkner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Yeah, I do want to endorse what Councillor Dowsing is saying, and I'm happy to second that recommendation. I do want to make sure, though, that we're clear that those engagement plans will come back to here as noting reports, because not only do we want to ensure that these happen and with speed, that makes sense, but we also need to make sure that we have eyes on the how this is going to occur, so that it doesn't, it's informed by our communities that we represent.
Thank you for that. Councillor Faulkner.
Yeah, excellent report, and thank you, and agree that a region-wide approach makes sense. Just a word of caution. There is a tendency, and this is where a regional flavour comes in, and I know you, I hark on about it all of the time, but within the first couple of lines of the Healthy Waterwise document, we're immediately talking about farming. Now, this region does an awful lot than just farming with its land. So we need, I guess, to make sure that all of the industries that occur on our land, i.e. forestry and everything else as well, tourism, all of those things, are taken into account here, because it concerns me that we're going to drill down into one industry and we run the risk of under-resourcing ourselves to manage all of the industries that happen across the tapestry of our landscape here.
Okay. Thank you for that. Councillor Worsnop, Councillor Dowsing, just turn your microphone off, thanks.
Thank you. I agree with the point that Shannon made. I think definitely there's a good case to be made for obviously just getting on with it, right? I think I wonder if the Motu, while it obviously has probably some of our more intense land use in terms of stocking rates because it's a beautiful country, it's also probably some of the most advanced in terms of the action that is being taken. They have been approved for MPI, the second round of the project, so there's already a lot going on there. I really hope that the consultants who are working in this area utilise the fact that most of that catchment is already part of a group, and that you actually don't go over it and create something entirely separate and overarching, which you potentially risk the current project and undermine your ability to have credibility, essentially, in the community, which is already quite galvanised. There's a huge opportunity there, I think, just to tap into the enthusiasm that the community have already. So I would recommend that contact is made with the group as it stands, just to, council already hold plans for 13 of those farms because they've been reviewed by council. So you've got a great start. I agree that it will probably be one of your quicker projects for that reason. I do also support Amber's point, though. Publicly, I think we need to progress with more urgency the northern catchments, because there is a huge there's a huge sense of needing to get a better handle on what our challenges are there. And I'm hoping that something like a catchment plan will help guide what further research we need our science team to be doing, what some of our options are in terms of the resource management plan review are. So pulling that up the priority list would aid those things. So yeah, support what you guys are saying. Just really can't emphasize enough, work with the community where you can. And yeah, have fun. This stuff is way, way more fun than lots of other stuff we do, I would imagine.
And I know that council, some council staff are involved in the Waimata River project as well, where they have the whole catchment involved already. And I know Dame Anne Salmond and that recently had some community meetings, and they're really keen to help us with this. So I would hope that we would also make sure they play a big part when we do the Waimata catchment, because they're really keen and they have that vested interest that, you know, all the landowners and iwi are involved there as well. Councillor Akuata Brown, then Councillor Seymour.
Just a quick question, really following on from what Councillor Worsnop has just stated. What are the indicators for prioritisation in the space of catchments? Do we have a list of what makes something a priority above others? I'm just cautious that with stakeholders, people can come with an agenda to say that their part of the rohe is more important. So how do we mitigate that?
Through your worship, probably nothing structured or explicit. We recognise them all too, obviously, for the fact that it's an upper catchment which feeds into another region. It's got water quality issues at the top, which means there are water quality issues down the bottom. and the fact that downstream component is an outstanding freshwater body as well. It's got I forget, conservation. Sorry. So we've got quite a good reason for progressing the water catchment plan. For the Waiapu, we have a JMA in place, and we have commitments to that catchment in particular. For the other catchments, it's a little bit more flexible, I guess. We haven't really landed on a solid approach to how we go forward. But we do appreciate that the Waimata catchment and the Ruama catchment are both pressing as well.
Ms. Kohere.
Through the chair, the prioritisation has occurred through the development of the freshwater plan, but also through your project implementation plan that you agreed, I think it was in October last year. That's a requirement from Ministry for the Environment to identify your priority catchments that you are going to develop catchment plans. That's how we prioritise.
Councillor Seymour. Thank you, Ms. Kohere.
Thanks very much. That's absolutely right. It was right back at the time of the freshwater plan development that the Motu catchment was recognised. And since both Waimata and Oawa are in my ward, I just want to acknowledge the comment that the Mayor made. The Waimata catchment have a strong catchment group. It's been functioning for about 2 years, initiated, well done, by some former staff members of GDC who now in the private capacity and in the community. And Uawa Nui in Tolaga Bay has certainly done a huge amount of work in the lower end of their catchment. So there are groups out there we need to make sure we work with and not over the top of as we develop the next stages. Thank you.
Councillor Burdett. Microphone.
Should be included in this work. This is a huge amount of work for staff right across the region. I'm pleased at long last, and I state that at long last, we're going to talk to the actual stakeholders. As Kerry said, the landowners.
Well done. Thank you, staff. Listening to all these comments, it's fantastic. I was just thinking all the work that our council are doing, but there are so many keen community groups that are part of this and want to be part of this. So I also want to commend staff for the way they reach out to those community groups and include them, because in the end of the day, our success is their success. So thank you for that as well, Yannick. Do I have a mover for this paper? Oh, yes, I do have. Can you please, Coral, read the new recommendation out? Thank you. So that is the list on page 26. I've got the under point 19 is what Councillor Dowsing moved, what Councillor Wharehenga second. All in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you. We move on to our next paper. This is the statement of intent, which we have workshopped a few times. We've had our colleagues from Gisborne Holdings Limited join us to discuss. Any comments that staff want to make? I see that there are some, like under point 11, it says it's not consistent, but then there's an explanation. And then otherwise it says it's consistent. So just looking at it, it looks mostly consistent with what we discussed going forward. So any comments or questions around the statement of intent for Gisborne Holdings Limited? Councillor Seymour.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move the recommendation and its recommendation A to approve the statement of intent as attached and acknowledge the work that both Gisborne District Council and the holding company put into getting it to this point.
Moved by Councillor Seymour, seconded by Councillor Faulkner. Any questions or clarifications? We have worked this through quite a few times. Councillor Dunn.
Councillor Seymour, did you only move recommendation A and not B, or did you do both? Oh, right. Okay.
Yep. Everyone happy with that? All in favour? Contrary? Carried. We move to a very interesting paper on greenhouse gas emissions. Let me just find my...
Your Worship, can I just make a comment on that?
Yes, please.
On the
page 75.
Paper. What is a significant omission in this report is the stock on Tairawhiti Pārai. So they haven't calculated those into, I think these are 3 categories in there. And so the 60,000 stock units that we have not been included in this, which I would think, based on our previous report and the look across our emissions as a region, would significantly change the way that's apportioned across those 3 domains.
Thank you. Councillor Cranston.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a bit of concern in this paper, but I was quite underwhelmed by the paper. There seemed to be a lot of stating the obvious, you know, I mean, big things used big power. What I was really interested in didn't come through was our net position. You know, we've got a lot of sequestering going on around the district as well. So I was kind of keen on seeing what our net position was, but that doesn't come through there. The concern, of course, is Paukahu, and the level of that is indicated, but there's sort of no options around indicating that we've got to urgently do something about it, or you know, where do we go from here with Paukahu? Because it sort of made a comment there that said something along the lines of it's going to be there until Gisborne District Council doesn't own it, but that's not going to happen. So I think we do need to have some discussion around Paukahu, and I mean, to me, it is a big number, but I don't know how dramatic that number is, you know, so sort of, I think we do need to have some understanding around Paukahu.
Thank you for that. And just to clarify, this is only a report to tell us our emissions inventory. This is not telling us, you know, our action plan to address it. So, yeah. I have now forgotten who was next. Councillor Robinson, then Councillor Seymour.
Whilst this is an information and capturing report, there are recommendations made at paragraph 17 to 19, and actually Paukahu doesn't feature in that, and that's what I've written on my thing in big red bold. Paukahu discharging 60%, 12 million kilograms per annum for we don't know how many decades. And I certainly recall the conversation we had with Jody and Sam out when we went visit Paukahu with Rongwhakata Iwi Trust, and they spoke about their desire to have that remediated. Now, I would love to see this somehow make it into our long-term plan as a project we work with our iwi, and we can have a win-win situation.
Thank you for that. Anna. David.
Through you, Madam Chair, the remediation of Paukahu would need to give you some quite precise, and we can show you the reasons why we'd be unable to collect the gas that comes off Paukahu. It's not completely lined. It doesn't have a gas collection system in place in it at the moment. So you have to put gas collection as a landfill is filled. You can't do it after the fact. You can't run the pipes to be able to collect the methane in order for what's there. So the remediation of landfills is something we will be talking to you about in the future. As you know, we have ongoing concerns with a number of landfills across the Rohi, so we'll be bringing those to you and as to what our concerns are with those.
Thank you. Councillor Seymour, you were next on the list.
Thank you. I was going to further comment about that, but that's good. Thank you,
okay,
Mr. Wilson. But the other point I want to make at 10, there's an element that are a bit simplistic because it actually suggests that 10, the native vegetation is going to grow our amount of sequestration. Native vegetation sequests and grows very slowly. So it's a bit of a red herring to suggest that there's going to be a huge amount of growth and sequestration from native vegetation. Maybe in the the next 20-year plan, but not in the 10-year.
Thank you for that. Any other questions around the table? Councillor Worsnop.
Yep, I had quite a few questions, just probably because it wasn't clear whether some things were included. So I know the cattle were not, we just heard, included from Tairawhiti. Were the pines on Tairawhiti included? No, so the Tairawhiti is not included. Got you. But we have included their vehicle usage. Interesting. Yeah, it does. Yeah, anyway, I digress. Have we included our road corridors, which are hundreds of hectares of trees? And have we included in that 25% that was outside of our control, but we do control it, the roading contractors, the road maintenance, tar seal and all that kind of stuff. And sorry, I'm not quite finished. And just in terms of the implications from the waste landfill, I think probably something we can take out of that is how important it is going forward with how we treat our waste, because we've got this enormous legacy from something that we didn't know any better at the time, and it's turned into an enormous emissions source that we could be attempting to get ahead of so we don't repeat it. What does that mean for implications of a wetland if we use a wetland to treat our water, our wastewater, because you're possibly going to end up with another quite large source of methane emissions from a wetland. So there's quite a lot in there that I think could have been deeper, maybe.
Thank you, Hannah.
So, through your worship, there's a few questions around the table that I can try and answer. I might work backwards just because they're coming on my mind. Trees in the roading corridor were not included. We couldn't find a solid piece of information, that piece of data on that, but we did include woodlots, and which links back to Andy's question. We did have a net position in there, the fact that we actually use our woodlots for commercial gain. So actually we created emissions through our woodlots instead of sequestering. So that's why I indicated that actually having native biodiversity might be a better way forward for us, although it doesn't grow as quickly and sequester as quickly. We're not cutting it down. So that's one way forward. And contractors in the roading space, we had some assumptions through our, how much we spend on them. So there is some work going forward to make that a bit clearer around the emissions they actually emit through their activities, and that's something we can work on through our procurement policy, and actually having it as a clause perhaps that through their contract we actually require them to report back on the fuel use and that sort of thing, to make it easier for us to collect that information instead of going back and asking them after the fact. So there's a few process things that we can work on. I think covered everything. Were there any other questions?
Nothing? Okay. Councillor Faulkner. Oh, yep. Oh, goody, what's wrong with me today? You go first, then. Craziness is contagious, absolutely.
Did the
and
mayor
then
just
Sandra.
request that I start the list of what's wrong with her today, or
Absolutely.
should I get to my question?
You can send me an email. Okay, you go.
Look, this is, my questions have been canvassed a little bit, but I wanted to expand on them, and particularly in the Pokahu remediation, the question wasn't around whether we could do capture on site, it's what we can do in the future. And there will be a council within this country that will land a waste to energy trial, because it's paramount on people's minds, and someone will get that funding through the Waste Minimisation Fund and central government support. It's bound to go somewhere, and I would like it to go here. So we should be looking seriously at if that is something that we can push for. The comments that Councillor Warsnott made around our treatment of solid waste. Currently, we do no separation in our solid waste. We are exporting all of our green waste and compostables out of region, and that's one of the largest sources of those gases. And it's something that we can deal with that source instead of just exporting our problem. And we already have it in the report that actually only captures 65% of the methane export, if you cap it anyway. So yes, we should be dealing with our problems at source. Sequestration, we know, is only a small part of the solution, and it's not going to save us. We need to do better in that circular economy concept, and that kind of makes me wonder why, as we've identified, the report that we've got from an external agency is incomplete. Why is there no comment on, or why have we missed some sources of output, why have we missed some capture elements, and why have we missed the big ticket item and any recommendations? The recommendations are light, you know, change to LED bulbs. Well, come on. I expect either complete information in the report, or I expect significant recommendations, and neither of those are there. So yeah, it'd be good to take another look at this with a lens of what we can achieve that is greater than what's in this report.
Ms. Kohere.
Through the chair, so the intent of the report is to set almost the baseline for the inventory going forward. So there will be measures over time as to, this is the beginning inventory, noting the emissions, and then over time you actually can measure the progress to where you're going. It isn't intended to be a solution to all of them at the moment. It's a state in time, and then there's also, it has been based on consistency with other councils that are it's a new area in terms of reporting, and we're trying to be consistent with them as well so that you can benchmark that. So the templates, obviously there are some learnings to improve on, but it's kind of a line in the sand for now, so that next time when we bring the next update back, you should be able to measure some improvement, and we can look at more types of actions to improve as opposed to
Supplementary.
all solutions now.
Supplementary, and this goes back to what Councillor Brown was asking this morning around our work plan. How do we intend to report our progress, and in what form will that come? Will it come in within other items in the agenda, or will there be specific items that come onto our agenda around reporting our progress against our emissions targets?
CEO.
So through your worship, I think so going back to the inventory point, I think what we currently have is a big part missing from this inventory, which doesn't give us a total picture in terms of where we need to target our recommendations or attempts to address things, because we might find that if we've included farms with the forestry, that our net overall position might be neutral. We don't know, because we don't have that information. What we do know here is that we've got an issue around the landfills. That's really clear. We know that, and we're going to be bringing a paper as to how we can respond and what we can do in that area. In terms of reporting going forward, so there's a session this afternoon or mid-morning around climate change, so that will talk about expectations there and how we might be able to report things back through our long-term plan, whatever commitments we make. This would be very much part of it when we get the right picture first. So I think that's the issue here.
Thank you. No, Councillor Faulkner was next. I'm not losing my marbles. You are next.
Well, that's a relief. Your worship. I think probably what I have is a suggestion as much for our CEOs and staff as anything. What I often find missing in this reporting is the environmental impact of our decisions. Now, we talk about climate change as one part of it, but waste, its impact on our water sources and in fact on our environment seems to be missing quite often. So as a decision maker, I'd like to know that we have taken those things into account. Now, I don't know how you best do that, but I believe that the environment sits very firmly in the same space as tangata whenua in our communities. It sits at the front end of these reports where we can say, well, you know, if we're going to bring a paper to this group around landfills, for example, these are the improvements that we could make to our environment by addressing these situations. Yeah, and it'll come into catchment plans, and it will come into emissions inventories. It flows across everything that we do. So it would be, I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to front load these reports with the impact that our decisions will have on our environment. And they can be positive. They can be very positive.
Thank you for that. I think this particular report is a noting report in terms of what the consultants did and flagging that there is an issue with this report. We're missing a piece of that puzzle. And then once we come back with, so things like the landfill will cover the environmental components, but whether we, I don't know, again, it goes to the how often we play with the template versus how succinct the report is in terms of the language used and the punchy points there. We'll have to think about how we do that.
Thank you. Councillor Cranston, Akuata Brown, Debbie, Tony.
So the information we've got here now is a good starting point for plotting it going forward. The information we've had on Paukai in the past, is that in a similar format? What I'm getting at is, do we know if it's getting worse heaps, or is it just getting worse a little bit, or is it actually going down? Because if it's getting worse heaps quickly, then it indicates that we've got to take action.
Mr. Wilson.
Through you, Your Worship, every landfill has, a closed landfill has a life cycle that it goes through over about a 60-year period. What the team are going to be working on is the number of closed landfills that we have across the Rohe, and we're going to come back with a prioritisation to be considered in the next long-term plan and in the WMMP. They need to be discussed as part of that context. So Paukahu is through its cycle, it's as expected. We're having similar amounts of leachate and what I would call predictable volumes coming through. There's no real immediate causes of concern that we have outside of how an old landfill of its size and era would be performing at that age.
Thank you. Councillor Akuata Brown.
Sounds like we need a really strong green advocate for
point of order
environments in this region. But what I was meaning is that I want to pick up on what Councillor Dowsing is saying in respect to wasted energy, because we've talked of this, and I know we will in future spaces, but we found favour in respect to funding for this region. So this is highlighting a few spots in our region where we've seen landfill up the coast, spill into Awa, and we've got other spaces in our region that right now we all kind of hope that they won't, show themselves, be it Waikanai, et cetera, et cetera. So I just am really hopeful that we can pursue, I guess, in the vision for this region, managing all those waste management areas. And so I would like us to pursue and push on with trying to see that be our region's a mark of us, as far as what we hope for. So the waste minimalisation project, I was wondering how that was going as far as funds and where it's at. Oh, it is part of it. Oh, it's not, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
That's probably a separate subject,
Yep.
sorry. So I just really think it's great to see this here, even though it's got those gaps that we're looking to fill. But thank you very much for the work. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor Gregory and then Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Can you just tell us why the Tairawhiti Farms information wasn't included?
As I understand it, the information may not have been provided to the consultant.
And we will follow that up. Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Heartened to hear Mr. Wilson say that a report will be coming on Paukahu. Can we please ensure that the start of that conversation, Ronald Vakart is involved? Having spoken to one of their trustees this morning, he said he was not aware of any conversations going on about Paukahu. So moving forward.
Oh, who did you speak to?
So we work with the Paukahu Trust on that,
yeah,
around the remediation. But so this has been part of and we will provide that background information to you. 2017, a thorough report on landfills and our liabilities were presented, and some of the issues and challenges associated with that coming out of our regulations team. So you will get a bit of background on all the landfill issues, not just Paukahu, but we have issues right across the region, as do all other councils in New Zealand.
This is a national problem. Last question, Councillor Seymour.
It relates to the Chief Executive's response and further to the question raised by Councillor Cranston, because some of us do know that Paukahu's been around this table for quite a while, and we did have funding for some remediation. So can we please have that report that the Chief Executive has now referred to, so that we can understand what has really been done about it? Because it was at least 2 years ago, money was put into an annual plan for remediation of Tairawhiti. Thank you. Can that be reasonably soon, like at the next Sustainable Tairawhiti meeting, if the material is available? Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, can I have a mover and Councillor Wharehinga? Is there a seconder for this? Councillor Faulkner? All in favour? Contrary, carried. I declare this meeting closed. We're going to have a cup of tea and then come back 10 past 10.